On October 8, 1956, a building opened in the suburban town of Edina, Minnesota, that would become one of the most copied structures in the history of American architecture. It was called Southdale Center. It was designed by a Viennese emigre named Victor Gruen, who had fled Nazi-occupied Austria in 1938 with his architectural degree, $8 in cash, and no command of English. Gruen had grown up in Vienna, a city built around coffee houses, pedestrian arcades, and civic plazas. Public spaces where people of all classes gathered, lingered, and lived. He came to post-war America and found an expanding suburbia that had none of that. His original vision for Southdale was not just a shopping center. It was a mixed-use community hub surrounded by apartments, schools, a medical center, parks, and a lake. The mall itself, two levels of retail arranged around a light-filled central courtyard with eucalyptus trees, a bird aviary, public art, and a cafe, was meant to be the heart of a dense, walkable neighborhood that would bring European civic life to the American suburb. What the developers built was the retail courtyard. Then they surrounded it with a sea of parking. The apartments were not built. The schools were not built. The medical center was not built. What proliferated, first across America and then across the world, was the shopping mall stripped of everything Gruen had intended it to contain. By the mid-1970s, he had designed more than 50 malls in the United States, and he hated most of what he had wrought. In a speech in London in 1978, he disavowed the industry he had created, calling the developments that had spread across America a bastardization of his ideas. He said he refused to pay alimony for them. It is a strange irony that the man who invented the modern shopping mall spent his final years wishing he hadn't. And it is an even stranger irony that the reinvention the mall now needs, in order to survive the digital age, looks remarkably like the vision he had in 1956 that nobody bothered to build. To understand what happened, you need to understand how completely the mall dominated American commercial and social life for the 4 decades that followed Southdale's opening. Between 1956 and 2005, roughly 1,500 enclosed malls were built across the United States. At the peak, there were approximately 25,000 shopping malls of all sizes in the country. They generated enormous amounts of economic activity, employed millions of people, and became culturally something larger than their function. The mall was where American teenagers congregated on Saturday nights. It was where families spent Sundays. It was where elderly people walked for exercise in air-conditioned safety. George Romero set his 1978 zombie film Dawn of the Dead almost entirely in a mall, and the choice was deliberate. The mall had become the centerpiece of American existence. The business model that sustained all of this was deceptively simple. A mall owner would sign long-term leases with 2 or 3 large department stores, Sears, JCPenney, Macy's, Nordstrom, and use those anchor tenants as the gravitational force that drew foot traffic. Then they would fill the space between the anchors with smaller retailers, who would pay higher per square foot rents than the anchors precisely because the anchors had already done the work of attracting people to the building. The anchors subsidized the economics of everyone else. The more traffic, the more the smaller tenants could sell, the more stable the rent rolls, the more valuable the real estate. This model worked brilliantly for 40 years. Then it stopped working. The reasons are layered and they compound each other, but the largest single cause is e-commerce. In 2024, online retail accounted for approximately 20% of all US retail sales. That sounds modest until you consider that it was essentially zero 30 years ago, that it continues to grow, and that it is structurally concentrated in exactly the categories: apparel, electronics, books, media, toys, that malls had historically depended upon. You cannot buy a haircut online. You can absolutely buy a shirt. Amazon was not the only culprit, but it was the most consequential. It built the infrastructure, warehousing, logistics, same-day and next-day delivery networks that made online shopping not just possible, but genuinely more convenient than driving to a mall, parking, navigating a large building, waiting in a queue, and driving home. Convenience, it turned out, was the mall's central value proposition. and the internet did convenience better. The structural damage appeared first in the anchor stores. Department stores, the very tenants whose gravitational pull held the entire business model together, began failing at scale. Sears, which had once been the largest retailer in the world, filed for bankruptcy in 2018. JCPenney filed in 2020. Lord and Taylor filed in 2020. Century 21 filed in 2020. Macy's, which has so far survived, announced it would close 150 stores by the end of 2025. When a mall lost one anchor, lease clauses embedded in the contracts of smaller tenants, called co-tenancy clauses, often allowed those tenants to reduce their rents or exit their leases. When a second anchor closed, the economic viability of the entire building could collapse in a cascade. By 2022, an estimated 2 million square feet of mall space was being demolished in the United States every year. No new enclosed megamall had been built since 2014. By some estimates, only around 700 large functioning malls remained in the country by that point, down from a much larger figure a generation earlier. A projection by Capital One Research in 2024 suggested that of the roughly 1,150 functioning malls at the time, only 150 might remain by 2032. That projection may be too severe, but it captures a real trajectory. The American mall, as a commercial real estate category, is in structural decline. At the end of 2024, malls had a vacancy rate of 8.7%, more than double the overall average retail vacancy rate. In 2024, there was a negative net absorption of 3.3 million square feet of mall space, meaning significantly more was vacated than occupied. And yet, the story is not simply one of extinction. It is more interesting than that. What is dying is a specific version of the mall, a particular business model, a particular tenant mix, a particular value proposition. What is emerging in the spaces left behind is something more varied and in some ways more compelling. The clearest way to understand the divergence is to look at how different types of malls are performing. Analysts typically categorize US malls into tiers A, B, and C, based on sales per square foot and quality of location. What the data shows is that this is not a uniform decline. Class A malls, located in affluent, high-density areas with strong demographics, are performing relatively well. Their vacancy rates are lower, their foot traffic has recovered, and some are raising rents. Class C malls, lower traffic, lower income catchment areas, already weakened before the pandemic, are closing or being converted. The middle tier is where the existential uncertainty lives. The malls that are surviving are doing so by understanding something fundamental. The reason people came to malls in the first place was never purely transactional. They came for the experience of being somewhere. They came for social reasons. They came because the physical environment offered something: temperature control, variety, the energy of crowds, the pleasure of looking at things that staying home did not. E-commerce took the transaction. It cannot take the experience. This insight is driving a wholesale rethinking of what a mall is for. The most dramatic example of the experiential pivot is American Dream, a 3 million square foot complex in East Rutherford, New Jersey, that opened in 2019 after a construction saga spanning nearly 2 decades. American Dream is roughly 55% entertainment and dining and 45% retail. Its non-retail offerings include a water park, a Nickelodeon-themed indoor amusement park, 2 miniature golf courses, an indoor ski slope, an ice rink, and a performing arts venue. It has only one traditional department store anchor, Saks Fifth Avenue. Everything else designed to bring people through the doors is an experience you cannot replicate at home with a delivery app. The formula is a deliberate inversion of the post-war mall's logic. The original mall used retail as the draw and treated dining and entertainment as secondary amenities. American Dream and the properties following its model use entertainment as the draw and treat retail as the secondary revenue stream that benefits from the traffic entertainment generates. There is evidence this reordering works. Research from JLL found that 40% of US consumers choose which mall to visit based primarily on the food offering. Malls that invest heavily in food and dining see transaction volumes increase meaningfully. For the 2024 holiday season, foot traffic data showed that mall visits exceeded pre-pandemic levels for Black Friday. and analysts noted that a significant portion of visitors were going to malls for reasons other than shopping, including seasonal events, restaurants, and cinemas. Barnes & Noble, of all tenants, has emerged as a surprising data point in this shift. At the Coronado Center Mall in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Barnes & Noble accounted for nearly 8% of all visits to the mall in 2024, outperforming both Macy's and JCPenney as a traffic driver. A bookshop in an era of Amazon, drawing more people to a mall than the department stores that were once the entire point of the building. The irony is dense. Beyond entertainment and food, the most structurally significant transformation is the repurposing of mall space for uses that have nothing to do with shopping at all. As of early 2024, at least 192 shopping malls across the United States were in various stages of planning to convert space into residential apartments. The logic is straightforward. The United States has an estimated housing deficit of around 3.8 million homes. It also has tens of millions of square feet of vacant mall space, often occupying prime suburban real estate with established road access, good schools nearby, and developed infrastructure. In Phoenix, Arizona, the former Paradise Valley Mall opened 400 luxury residential units in 2024. In Indianapolis, Lafayette Square Mall is converting space into 1,200 apartments. America's oldest shopping mall, the Arcade Providence in Rhode Island, which opened in 1828, converted its upper floors into micro apartments as far back as 2016. Healthcare has moved in where Sears once stood. Medical clinics, urgent care centers, dialysis facilities, and dental practices have become among the most sought-after replacement tenants for large vacant anchor boxes. They bring predictable, recession-resistant foot traffic. They do not compete with e-commerce. People cannot get a blood test delivered to their door, and they benefit from the parking infrastructure that malls already have in abundance. Fitness has followed a similar path. Gyms and wellness studios, from large format operators like Lifetime down to boutique cycling studios and yoga chains, have been among the fastest growing tenant categories in struggling malls over the past decade. They bring regular, high frequency visits. A gym member might visit 3 times a week. A shopper at a clothing store might visit 3 times a year. That frequency makes them valuable anchors in a way that a traditional retailer simply is not. Education has moved in too. Colleges and trade schools have taken space in former mall anchor buildings. Municipal services, libraries, government offices, community centers have relocated into mall spaces in several cities, turning formerly private commercial real estate into genuine civic infrastructure. The West Side Pavilion in Los Angeles, a once popular mall that closed its retail operations in 2020, was converted into a research and office campus for Google and UCLA. It is now called One West Side. The transformation is almost philosophical. The building that once existed to extract money from consumers now houses people thinking about the future. The arc of the shopping mall's history is in one framing, a story of a good idea that was badly executed for 60 years and is now being painstakingly corrected. Victor Gruen wanted to build communities. He built retail. The retail became a monoculture, dependent on department stores and apparel brands that the internet eventually undercut. The monoculture is collapsing. What is replacing it? Slowly, imperfectly, in fits and starts, is closer to what Gruen intended. Mixed-use precincts with housing and healthcare and fitness and food and civic space, anchored sometimes by retail but not defined by it. Places where the value proposition is not that you can buy things, but that you can be somewhere with other people in a physical environment that justifies the trip. Whether that reinvention happens fast enough and at sufficient scale to absorb the vacant space that the retail apocalypse is generating, that is a question of capital, zoning, political will, and time. But the underlying direction is clear. The mall is not dying. The mall as pure retail is dying. What survives will be something closer to a town center, which is, improbably, exactly what the man who built the first one always wanted it to be.